I learned the hard way that a son can look you in the eye and talk to you like you're a stranger standing between him and a payday. One night, Ethan told a room full of people that I'd stolen from him money he never earned a house, he never touched a legacy he never cared to understand. I didn't argue. I just watched the last thread snap. If you've lived through something like that, tell me your story in the comments. The winter after Sarah's funeral stretched on longer than any season I could remember. Papers kept turning up in drawers and boxes I hadn't touched in years, each one pulling me back to pieces of her life I never fully understood. One afternoon, while sorting through a stack of documents near my desk, a sealed envelope slipped out. Her handwriting ran across the front, steady, careful marking it as something meant for me alone. The letter held details about a royalty account worth far more than I expected, and a small house she'd inherited in Cape Breton. Nothing about it felt like a gift. It read more like a burden she hoped I'd manage with some measure of sense. I set the pages beside me and tried to breathe through the weight of it. Ethan walked in without knocking. He didn't ask what I was doing. His hand landed on the folder before I could move it aside, and he flipped it open like it belonged to him. He skimmed a few lines, then tossed the papers back onto the table. "How long were you planning to hide this from me?" His tone carried no hesitation. Not anger entitlement, the kind that stings more than anything shouted. The words came at me faster. "Stop pretending this is complicated. Mom's gone. I deserve my part. You don't even use half of what you own. So why keep all this for yourself?" The room narrowed around us. Every sentence from him cut deeper than the last, not because of the demand, but because he didn't pause to wonder what any of it meant. As if grief was a bill I owed, and he came to collect. He waited for a reaction. Nothing came. My hands stayed still on the desk. A lifetime of keeping steady held me in place even as the floor shifted. He scoffed and headed for the hallway. "Do whatever you want, Dad, but this isn't over." His footsteps faded. That tone-sharp final echoed longer. The folder lay open, pages bent at the corners. I gathered everything, slid the documents back into the envelope, and locked them in the drawer. The click of the lock steadied me more than anything else that day. Sitting there felt pointless, so I left the room and walked through the house without stopping. The air felt stale, the kind of heaviness that settles after too many unspoken things. Out in the garage, the familiar scent of tools and old engine parts grounded my thoughts. Work always did. It didn't care who was right or wrong. It only asked for focus and steady hands. I leaned over the workbench and let my palms rest on the cool metal. The phone vibrated in my pocket, but I didn't check it. Whatever message waited could sit. My breathing evened out as the hours wound down, and the ache in my chest dulled just enough for me to function. No matter how many years pass, there's always a moment when a father realizes something irreversible has shifted in his family. That afternoon was mine. The phone never stopped buzzing the morning after Ethan stormed out of the house. A dozen missed calls, half from numbers I didn't recognize, the rest from people who hadn't checked in once during Sarah's illness. Every notification carried the same tone, sharp, judgmental, wrapped in concern that didn't belong to them. Ethan had moved fast. Faster than I expected. By noon, a cousin on Sarah's side left a voicemail saying, "He told us you kept money from him." Is that true, Michael? The message ended with a sigh, thicker than the words themselves. Not a single one of them asked if I was holding up, only whether I'd done something wrong. Another relative texted, "You've always been strict. Don't push him away now." Strict. That was the word they chose. Walking across the living room felt heavier than usual. The house hadn't changed, but everything familiar carried a new edge. Each step reminded me that whatever balance we'd once had as a family had cracked overnight. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a shift, subtle but unmistakable. I drove to the garage and opened early. Work brought routine, and routine helped me think. The first customer of the day was Lena. She pulled her sedan into the lot and stepped out with a puzzled look. "You look like you slept on concrete," she said. "It's been a long week." She studied me for a moment, arms folded. "Something's weighing on you. Don't pretend it isn't." Rather than answer, I raised the hood of her car and scanned the engine, hoping the noise would cover more conversation. She didn't push further, but she didn't leave either. A few minutes passed before she spoke again. "You're carrying something alone. I've seen that look on people sitting in waiting rooms paying bills they can't cover, holding families together with tape and hope." Her words tightened something in my chest. Ethan's voice from the night before cut through the memory. How casual it sounded. How decided. "Lena, I said it's not something I want to get into." She nodded once. "Just remember, pressure doesn't ease when you ignore it." The car didn't need much. A belt adjustment, a quick flush, nothing complicated. She thanked me, lingered as if she wanted to offer more, then headed out. An hour later, another message came in. This one from Sarah's older sister. She's gone, Michael. "Let the boy breathe. You can't cling to everything." That line forced me to sit down. I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. Ethan had framed our argument to make himself the wounded party, and they embraced it without hesitation. No one asked why he had gone rifling through my things. No one questioned his motive. They just assumed the stubborn widower was hoarding what should belong to the child. People believe whatever version benefits their empathy the most. That's what I learned in those few hours. A couple walked into the shop for a tire repair, forcing me to straighten up and focus. Their small talk filled the space long enough for me to hold myself together. When they left, the silence that followed wasn't comforting. Too many unasked questions hanging in the air. My hands stayed busy. Wrenches, bolts, panels, anything that kept my mind from drifting. But even while tightening a bolt, the noise of what Ethan had stirred spread through me like small cracks forming under pressure. Then the garage office phone rang. I answered without checking the ID. A familiar voice snapped. "Why would you hide money from your own son?" It was one of Sarah's uncles, a man who hadn't visited in years. The urge to defend myself rose, but saying anything would only feed the situation. "I'll call you later," I told him. "You should have handled this better," he muttered before hanging up. The words stayed with me long after the call ended. Not because he said them, but because of how quickly people accepted Ethan's version of the truth. In the late afternoon, I stepped outside for a breather. The sun hung low over the rooftops, throwing long lines across the pavement. My shoulders felt tight, and my jaw hurt from being clenched too long. A mechanic named Paul walked past and nodded a greeting, unaware of the storm I was wrestling with. As I headed back into the garage, my phone vibrated again. Another message. I didn't open it right away, but the preview appeared on the lock screen. This time the sender was Sarah's sister. "Think about Ethan's future, not your pride." My thumb hovered over the screen, debating whether to respond or shut the phone off entirely. Pride. They all seemed convinced that was the root of everything. None of them knew how that conversation unfolded. None cared to ask. Stepping toward the workbench, I caught myself gripping the edge a little too hard. Getting through the day required a focus I didn't fully have. Every moment pulled me back to that envelope, the figures written in it, the house in Cape Breton, and the look on Ethan's face when he assumed it all belonged to him. The garage had settled into its afternoon rhythm when the office phone rang again. I picked up expecting a customer asking about brakes or an oil change. Instead, a familiar voice spoke my name. "Michael, it's Dana." From the publishing team. I worked with Sarah on her last project. Her tone carried something uneasy. I just heard something strange, she continued. Ethan told someone you were keeping his mother's estate for yourself, that you refused to release any of it. The wrench in my hand stopped mid-air. He said that, yes. I thought you should know. It didn't sound like you. The call faded out with a polite goodbye, but her words stayed sharp. Once the line disconnected, the garage felt smaller. Not colder, tighter. Like someone had tightened a strap across my ribs. A letter from Sarah sat in my jacket pocket. I unfolded it again, scanning the small handwriting. One line had always bothered me. Make sure he understands the cost of a life worth inheriting. The phrasing didn't explain what she expected from Ethan, and now that uncertainty dug deeper. For a moment, doubt edged in. Maybe I had been too rigid. Maybe grief had pushed me into a corner without noticing. Maybe Ethan interpreted my caution as possession. Then the memories surfaced: months of hospital visits, arguments about bills, nights when Ethan didn't show up because he needed space. Moments when Sarah's patience ran thin, and I tried to hold the middle ground. The past rose up in jagged flashes, not for nostalgia, but as reminders of how long the distance between us had existed. My phone buzzed again. A notification popped up: password change request for the family email account we once used to track Sarah's medical care. I tried logging in, access denied. Ethan had claimed it. The move wasn't impulsive, it was strategic, cutting me out of an account still tied to insurance statements, medical receipts, and portions of Sarah's estate. That realization steadied something in me, not anger, just clarity. No confrontation would fix this. Talking hadn't worked for years. The next steps required caution, not arguments. I locked the office door and pulled down the binder where we kept old paperwork. Every page connected to Sarah's estate royalties and property records needed to be saved somewhere Ethan couldn't reach. One document at a time, I scanned, copied, and sorted. The USB drive on my desk, filled with digital duplicates, Will's bank statements, correspondence with her editor, confirmation letters about Cape Breton. A calm rhythm formed as I worked. Not peace, just function. The bell above the garage door jingled. I turned, half expecting Ethan, but it was only a delivery guy dropping off a parts order. He waved and left before I could respond. Back at the desk, my laptop blinked with another alert: attempted login to my tax account. I reset the password, added two-step verification, and cut off shared access Ethan once used for filing jointly during college. It felt like closing a series of doors in a house that used to belong to both of us. Not long after, the phone chimed with a text from him. Need access to your email. There are things in there that belong to both of us. No greeting, no explanation, just entitlement laid bare. I didn't respond. Another message came quickly after: stop making this harder. Mom wouldn't want you blocking me. My jaw tightened. Using her as leverage, that was new. Or maybe it wasn't, and I'd ignored the signs for too long. The garage clock ticked past 6. I stayed at the bench, running through everything I had copied. The folder felt heavier now, even though it held only paper. A long list of responsibilities I'd carried without complaint. Backing up the files wasn't enough. I unplugged the USB, slipped it into a small envelope, and tucked it into the glove compartment of my truck. A place only I had access to. A place Ethan wouldn't think to check. The shop lights flickered as I shut down for the night. My hands moved on instinct to turn off the breaker lock. The tool cabinets pushed the trash bin toward the corner. Ordinary motions that helped quiet the noise in my head. Near the exit, my phone buzzed once more. A message from Ethan again. Don't freeze me out. I'm serious. We need to talk about that house. The wording wasn't a request. It was pressure sharpened by someone who believed time was on his side. I put the phone face down and reached for the garage keys. The metal felt solid against my palm, something real to hold on to. Outside, the lot was empty, the kind of emptiness that comes after a long day. I stepped toward the truck, replaying every move Ethan had made over the last 24 hours, each one intentional, each one pushing a little further. Halfway to the truck, another thought hit me. If he was willing to change passwords and spread rumors, what else would he do? That question followed me as the engine started. The dashboard glowed faintly, reflecting off the envelope, tucked in the glove compartment. A reminder of how much depended on staying a step ahead. The email from Ethan landed just after sunrise. I spotted it before heading to the garage, the subject line, blunt enough to stop me mid-step, clarify my inheritance. The body of the message carried the same tone he used in the house, short, direct, dismissive. I need you to explain my rights. We should move forward with selling the Cape Breton place. A quick sale benefits both of us. No greeting, no hesitation, not even a question mark. Reading it once wasn't enough. I went through it again then, a third time, trying to understand how he could speak as if everything belonged to him by default. No mention of Sarah. No acknowledgement of what she intended. Only a push for money he hadn't earned. Rather than reply, I closed the laptop and grabbed my jacket. The house felt thinner, like even the walls had stepped back from what was happening. Out in the garage, tools waited in their usual places, offering the kind of order Ethan seemed determined to break. A job came in early, a truck with a failing alternator. Work steadied my hands for a while, but the tension never eased. When the customer left, I wiped my palms on a rag. The phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ethan. A cousin of Sarah's sent a message. "Why are you hiding the real will? Ethan says you forged something." The accusation hit harder than I expected. Not because it was true, but because of how quickly they believed him. People latch onto the version that requires the least effort. That version painted me as the stubborn widower standing in the way of his son's future. Another text followed. "Just be honest, Michael. What are you protecting?" My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. They hadn't asked about my grief once. Not one message said, "How are you holding up?" Just questions about assets papers and Ethan's claims. The garage door rattled as the wind pressed against it. I stepped back into the office for a moment of space. On the desk sat the USB I'd filled with copies of every document. It looked small for something carrying the last remnants of the life Sarah and I had built. Before I could sit, the phone rang again. A voice from a real estate office introduced himself, asking to verify the transfer intent for the Cape Breton property. "I haven't requested any transfer," I said. "Well," he replied, "your son forwarded a copy of an older will and asked us to begin evaluation. We're checking before moving forward." The room seemed to tighten. Ethan had taken a document I hadn't seen in years, one that Sarah updated later, and used it to start a sale. The move wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't confusion. It was a decision. "Do not proceed," I said. "I'll contact your office with the current paperwork." After hanging up, I stood still long enough for the weight of it to settle. Ethan hadn't just crossed a line, he'd erased it entirely. A wrench slipped off the workbench and clattered onto the floor. The noise snapped me back. The USB caught my eye again, a reminder that this wasn't only about family trouble. It was about control. If I didn't take back the narrative, everything would spiral. Footsteps echoed in the doorway. Paul, one of the part-time guys, poked his head in. "You need anything before I clock out? Go ahead," I said. "I'll finish up here." He nodded and left without pressing further. I locked the office door, pulled open the desk drawer, and took out the envelope containing the finalized will, the one Sarah signed with witnesses during the last months of her life. The ink had faded slightly at the edges, but her signature remained steady. That alone grounded me long enough to breathe. My phone lit up again. Another message from a relative, Michael. "What are you hiding from the rest of us?" Not even a greeting. These people watched Sarah fade over months. They saw how exhausted I became. They knew how many shifts I picked up, how many nights I slept in hospital chairs. Yet the moment Ethan raised his voice, they believed the version that painted me as the problem. I slid the will and supporting documents into a larger folder. A small tremor ran through my fingers, not fear pressure. Years of carrying weight without complaint had finally found their limit. The shop lights buzzed overhead. I powered them down one at a time, leaving only the dim office lamp lit. Before stepping out, I checked the USB again, making sure the cap was secure. Losing it now would unravel everything. A notification chimed. Another message short from a relative I hadn't spoken to in months. Why lie, Michael? No room for courtesy. No room for truth either. I locked the office, pushed the door shut, and slipped the keys into my pocket. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil and cold metal, familiar and grounding. My boots scuffed the concrete as I crossed the floor toward the exit. By the time I reached the truck, a thought settled in, not loud, not final, but firm enough to hold. Silence hadn't protected me. And Ethan knew it. The next move would have to come from me, whether I was ready or not. I opened the truck door, set the folder on the passenger seat, and turned the ignition. The engine rumbled beneath my hands, steady and certain, while everything else threatened to drift out of reach. The envelope showed up early, pushed through the narrow gap at the bottom of the garage door. No return address. No handwriting I recognized. A thin shape light enough that I almost missed it while sweeping the concrete near the tool rack. Breaking the seal revealed a single sheet of paper, folded twice. A scanned letter, Sarah's handwriting, unmistakable even in grayscale. The top half matched what I already kept in my desk. The bottom half, the part torn or lost long ago, hit with the force of a blunt object. If Ethan cannot meet the minimum conditions I set, the assets will go to the Family Relief Fund. Do not let anyone push you out of the life I wanted for you. The words landed like a hand, gripping my shoulder, steady and firm. Whoever sent the scan didn't sign their name. Only a short line typed at the bottom. Don't let them rewrite what she left behind. I folded the page carefully, slower than necessary, letting the meaning settle. Someone out there knew more than they were saying. More than Ethan, that much was clear. A car horn honked twice outside. Lena pulled in with her silver Subaru, the same one she'd been nursing along for years. She stepped out, waved once, and came toward me. "You free?" she asked. "Yeah," I answered, moving aside to let her through. She studied my face before looking at the letter sitting on the workbench. "You're carrying something heavy. Want to talk?" A shrug was all she got. Talking never changed the facts. Still, she didn't walk away. That was one thing about Lena, she didn't push, but she didn't pretend not to notice either. Her gaze drifted to the letter. "Is that hers?" "Part of it." She waited, so I gave her the outline. Not everything, just enough for her to understand that Ethan wasn't slowing down. When I finished, she exhaled. "You're hoping he'll come to his senses. He won't. Kids don't pump the brakes when they think the road belongs to them." The truth of that stung. Not because she meant it harshly, but because she was right. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A notification from one of Ethan's accounts, a vague post about family taking what isn't theirs. Comments from his friends followed, each leaning in with sympathy he hadn't earned. He was building a narrative, a public one. Another buzz, a forwarded message from a relative on Sarah's side. Ethan had stopped by their house, told them he felt cut off, claimed I was withholding documents. He'd turned his version into something pitiable, and they'd believed it without a second thought. Lena caught the change in my expression. What now? He's meeting with her cousins, I said, talking in circles. She shook her head slowly. He's not talking. He's campaigning. More alerts, pinged, emails, notifications, names I barely recognized sharing the same sentiment, poor Ethan. One even wrote, he deserves access to his legacy. His father is being unfair. Legacy. As if Sarah's life was a vault he could unlock with enough noise. Stepping back from the bench, I braced a hand against the shelf. The room didn't spin, but something shifted underfoot, trust maybe. The last bit of it slipping. Lena touched my arm lightly. You need to decide whether you're going to protect what's yours or hope he stops before the damage gets worse. She left after that, taking her keys and giving me space. Her advice lingered long after the sound of her engine faded. Checking my phone again, one message stood out. A name I recognized, Daniel, one of Ethan's closest friends from high school. The text was short. He's talking to me about buying his share. Says you don't really own the place. Is that true? The words punched harder than I expected. Ethan hadn't just been venting. He was negotiating. As if I'd already stepped aside. As if I'd surrendered rights I hadn't even considered giving up. I replied only with, "It isn't true." Daniel's answer came seconds later. Then you need to tell him to stop before the wrong person gets involved. But the wrong person already had. Ethan himself. A cold clarity settled over me, the kind that comes when denial finally drops away. Hoping he'd turn around wasn't strategy. It was a stall. He'd mistaken my restraint for weakness and pushed harder each time I stepped back. I returned to the workbench, unfolded Sarah's letter again, tracing the sentence she'd added. She had seen something in Ethan long before I did. Not malice entitlement. A seed she tried to guide with conditions he'd never cared to understand. Her voice echoed through the written lines, steadier than mine had been for weeks. A thought formed solid enough that I didn't trust it at first. It grew with every detail I reconsidered the emails, the conversations, the lies, spreading through people who once hugged me at holidays. Enough. The envelope from the garage door sat near my tools, empty now but still important. Someone wanted me to wake up, and for the first time since Ethan's outburst, I felt the shift take hold. I gathered the letter, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and tucked it into the drawer where the rest of Sarah's documents waited. Then I locked it with the small brass key I rarely used. Outside, a car passed with a low hum. I listened until the sound faded. The garage cooled as the day stretched on the kind of cold that steadies a person's pulse rather than rattles it. A single decision lingered at the edge of my thoughts, ready to shape whatever came next. Time to gather everything, every record, every signature, every document, and take back what Ethan thought he could rewrite. The garage felt colder than usual as I pulled the USB from the drawer. A small device, barely the size of my thumb, yet heavy with weeks of strain. Papers covered the workbench, diagrams, charts, receipts. Each one connected to the life Sarah and I built long before Ethan learned how to spell his own name. I powered up the laptop and set the USB beside it. My hands moved without hesitation, sorting digital folders into clean stacks. Titles, dates, notarized signatures. Sarah had been meticulous about every detail. A part of me wondered if she'd known I'd need this trail one day. Halfway through scanning an email archive, my phone buzzed. Lena's name flashed across the screen. She didn't waste time once I answered. "Mark says you're dealing with more than gossip now." "He's right. You talked to the lawyer I mentioned." "Not yet." "Well, she said he's expecting you. Don't drag your feet." Her insistence grounded me. I thanked her and returned to the documents. Scrolling through years of correspondence, I found Sarah's last message to our estate attorney, short, formal, and painfully clear about her wishes. Seeing her words again steadied my pulse. Later that afternoon, I drove across town to meet the lawyer. A small office near the waterfront, modest furniture shelves lined with case files. The attorney, a man named Pierce, looked through the documents with steady concentration. "This is the most recent version," he said, tapping the notarized page, "and it overrides all previous drafts. Anyone who tries to challenge this without meeting the conditions here will face a losing battle. So I'm not imagining things." "No," Pierce replied. "Your son is overstepping. You have every right legally and ethically to secure these assets." His certainty removed the last trace of doubt. I signed the necessary forms authorizing him to confirm sole ownership with the local registry. He also filed a temporary freeze on all transfer requests concerning the Cape Breton house, a necessary shield. Driving home, a sense of order returned. Not victory, just stability. Enough to keep moving. When I entered the garage, someone stood waiting. Mark Evans leaned against the hood of my pickup, arms folded. "Thanks for coming," I said. He nodded, voice low. "I figured you'd want to know Ethan's getting advice from someone who doesn't care about facts. He's gearing up for a fight. What kind of advice? The kind that leads people into courtrooms they don't belong in." A faint bitterness crossed his face. Mark had been burned by family litigation before. The scars showed. He stepped closer. "Listen, Mike, if you want peace, you need preparation. Whether you like it or not, he's treating this like a strategy game. Then I'll respond accordingly. That's the right mindset." After he left, I returned to the laptop. The cursor blinked on a document that detailed Sarah's conditions for inheritance. Ethan had always ignored those boundaries. Now he wanted to erase them. A notification appeared and attempted login into my tax account. Another alert followed, a password reset request for my Apple ID. Someone was fishing around. Not skilled enough to hide it, but bold enough to try. My phone rang next, a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" A man's voice, low and forced. "Split it with your son. That's all you need to do." The call ended before I could speak. I stared at the phone. The line wasn't a threat, not exactly. More like someone making sure I felt watched. Papers shuffled as I gathered everything into a waterproof portfolio, the kind used by contractors. It clicked shut with a heavy snap. I slipped it into the trunk of my car and locked the vehicle. Before shutting down the garage lights, I checked the shelves again, confirming the remaining originals were secured. Trust had become a luxury I couldn't afford. Back in the house, I reviewed Pierce's emails. Each attachment reinforced the same reality. Sarah had made her choices deliberately, and Ethan had no legal ground to demand anything yet. Still, Ethan believed the world owed him comfort. He believed I owed him obedience. A message from him appeared on my phone around 9. No greeting, no explanation. Just a screenshot of the Cape Breton listing from a real estate site. "We could get a good price. Stop delaying." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Any response would feed his fire. I deleted the draft and set the phone aside. Stepping back into the garage offered a strange calm. The air felt sharper, more defined. The rows of tools, neatly arranged by size and purpose, reminded me of what control looked like: measured steps, deliberate actions, no wasted motion. This wasn't about winning a battle. It wasn't about pride either. It was about preserving the truth. Sarah trusted me with the life she wove piece by piece. I rolled up my sleeves, returned to the workbench, and laid out the next stack of documents for scanning. The rhythm of preparation settled into me like muscle memory. Every page sorted brought the path ahead into better focus. No more uncertainty. No more hoping Ethan would reverse course. The line had been drawn. Now all that remained was making sure he couldn't cross it again. The message from the agency landed in my inbox a little before noon. One glance at the subject line, "Request for Ownership Verification Cape Breton Property," told me something had shifted. A call came seconds later. The woman on the line spoke with a polite strain, the kind used when dealing with a problem no one wants to inherit. "Mr. Hartman, we received a submission from your son containing an older will. He's asking us to confirm whether he can begin preliminary discussions about selling the property." Her voice kept moving, but the meaning stayed stubbornly still. Ethan had crossed from pressure into action. "I never authorized that," I said. "Which is why we're calling you directly. We've locked the file until the matter is clarified." Locked. Frozen. The words scraped along every part of my day. That property carried taxes, fees, insurance, none of which would move until someone untangled this knot. And that someone naturally was me. After the call ended, I stepped into the garage. Tools lined the walls, and the familiar workbench offered a sense of order I couldn't find anywhere else. The hum of a passing truck vibrated through the floor, routine sounds steady and indifferent. Mark phoned not long after. "Did you hear?" he asked. "The family had a meeting last night. Your name was dragged through it." "Not surprising. He told them you're withholding assets illegally. They ate it up." A long breath escaped before I answered. "He's gone further than I expected." "You're outnumbered over there," he said. "Don't expect anyone to defend you." I thanked him for letting me know, then returned to the bench. A socket wrench rolled slightly when I leaned forward. Small movement, but enough to remind me that nothing stays still forever, not even the things you anchor yourself to. Evening crept in, and I brewed a cup of coffee I barely touched. Somewhere between checking the locks and sorting mail, my laptop chimed again. Another email, this time from Ethan. Long paragraphs filled the screen, lines that swung between accusation and demand. "Bakong kon quien quet jin mot min, konselam jen noi jen chon." He never used that tone with me when he was young. Back then, disagreement came with hesitation, even guilt. Now he crafted these messages like he was drafting a complaint for court, sharp final rehearsed. My thumb hovered over the reply button, then drifted away. Responding would only fuel him. I closed the computer. A tremor ran through my fingers, subtle but undeniable. Weeks of stress had carved themselves into my body. No collapse, just the physical admission that this had gone too far. I went back to the garage. Something about being surrounded by machines, predictable, repairable, kept me steady. The workbench lamp buzzed faintly as I pulled the storage box forward. Folders, envelopes, the USB. All of it had been gathered, sorted, triple-checked. A memory surfaced Sarah sitting at our dining table with the estate attorney tapping her pen on the margin of the will. She wanted the language airtight, her word. I hadn't paid attention the way I should have. Grief had blurred the edges of that day. My phone rang again. This time Pierce's number. We found something he said. A fully executed and notarized will from 2 years after the version Ethan submitted. It's valid binding and includes the conditional clause your wife insisted on. The room steadied around me. You're certain? Yes. I'm sending the scanned copy now, but the physical document is here. Ethan has no legal claim unless he meets the criteria Sarah listed. And from what you've told me, he doesn't. Relief didn't come. Just a clear, narrow lane cutting through the fog. A path forward. What's the next step? I asked. You bring me the rest of the files? We'll file a notice of uncontested ownership. Once that's submitted, any actions from your son become null. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I'll be there first thing. After we hung up, I grabbed the portfolio from the trunk, set it on the bench, and reviewed the contents once more. Every signature matched, every date aligned, every condition Sarah left was still intact. A knock startled me. Loud, impatient, the kind meant to announce trouble. The garage door rattled when Ethan tried the handle. His voice barreled through the wood. "Open the door. We need to talk." There was nothing uncertain or emotional in the way he shouted. Just entitlement stretched thin. "I'm not opening it," I said loud enough for him to hear. "You're making this worse. I'm giving you a chance to fix it before I do something permanent. You've already done enough. I'm not the enemy here. You're acting like I'm trying to steal something from you." "You are," I answered. A long pause hit the air. "Then I'm your son. This shouldn't be a fight. You made it one." He cursed under his breath. The sound of his shoes scraping against the pavement followed a restless back and forth in front of the door. Last time he said, "Are you opening this or not?" No. Silence stretched for several seconds before he finally snapped. "Fine. We'll handle it another way." His footsteps retreated. A car door slammed. Engine roared. Tires screeched as he pulled out of the driveway. I turned the deadbolt on the garage door, not because he could force his way in, but because the act settled something internal. A line drawn. A boundary finally enforced. Then I lifted the portfolio again, checked the documents one last time, and set it near the passenger seat of my car, ready for the morning. No final thoughts, no declarations, just preparation for whatever came next. The morning moved slower than usual, as if the day itself was deciding whether to cooperate. I reached Pierce's office right when they unlocked the door. No ceremony, no small talk. He handed over the final stack of documents with a firm gesture that told me everything was ready. "Sign here, here, and here," he said. The pen felt heavier than expected. Each signature carried a consequence I'd tried to avoid for months. Still, the lines filled one after another. Ownership confirmed. Conditional clause activated. Ethan's name removed. Sarah's wishes protected. "That completes the filing," Pierce added. "Once the registry updates, no one can challenge it?" A simple enough statement, yet it shifted the ground beneath my feet. I tucked the documents into my folder and stepped out before he could offer condolences or congratulations. Neither felt appropriate. The phone vibrated the second I reached the truck. First a voicemail, then 3 messages, then another call from an unknown number that I didn't need to check to identify. Ethan had received the notice. The screen lit again. A text from him. "Bajung lam vai. Kon kan noi chuyen." Another followed. "You can't cut me out like I don't exist." And then a voicemail came through, long, uneven breaths at the start, followed by his words tumbling over each other. "Why would you do this? Why go behind my back? All I asked for was fairness." A pause. Then anger edged in. "If this is your final decision, just know you pushed me to it." Nothing in his tone surprised me. Nothing hurt either, not in the way it once did. I slid the phone back into my pocket without responding. Let the messages stack. Let them spill. I had nothing left to give to that cycle. On the drive home, the weight of what I'd done didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary, an act carried out because avoidance had become impossible. Responsibility had shifted back to me not as a shield for Ethan, but as a keeper of what Sarah entrusted. By the time I pulled into the driveway, more messages dotted the phone screen. A few from extended family trickled in too, this time not accusatory. One simply said, "We didn't know the full story." Another, "Hope you're holding up." The turn wasn't dramatic. It trickled in the way real consequences often do. News spreads loyalties. Waiver people correct their stance without announcing it. I left the phone on the kitchen counter and went to the garage. A couple of wrenches needed sorting. A filter needed replacing on an old Subaru someone had dropped off. Work steadied my hands. Patterns and tools made sense when nothing else did. While wiping down the bench, a thought surfaced. Unexpected sharp fear had shaped more of my life than I ever admitted. Fear of losing Ethan. Fear of failing him. Fear Sarah might think I didn't try hard enough. That fear had kept me still for too long. The phone vibrated again. More calls. More messages from Ethan. Then it fell quiet, and silence stretched in a way that didn't sting. By late afternoon, the sun hit the garage door just enough to cast a thin line along the floor. I closed up, locked everything, and went upstairs to pack a few things. Not a runaway pack, just clothes, toiletries, spare boots, and the folder of documents I had no intention of letting out of my sight. The cabin rental confirmation sat in my email, a simple place near Route 1, close enough to the water, but not too close to anything else. A month-to-month arrangement, no commitments, just space. I loaded the bag into the truck, double-checked the house keys, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Not to reflect, just to breathe. A single message buzzed through from Lena. "When you need to talk, I'll stop by," she wrote. My reply came easy, "I'm okay." Not a declaration, not reassurance, just the truth for that moment. The engine turned over steady and familiar. Gravel shifted under the tires as the truck rolled down the drive. The house shrank in the rearview mirror, not a symbol, not a memory monument, just a structure I'd lived in, leaving it the same way I'd entered on my own terms. Halfway to the cabin, I realized my shoulders had dropped for the first time in months. Not relief, just the absence of tension so constant I had forgotten it was there. The road curved north, lined with trees that needed no meaning assigned to them. At a gas station on the outskirts of town, I grabbed a bottle of water and stood for a moment near the truck bed, looking at the folder resting on the passenger seat. It held everything that sparked the fight, and everything that ended it. Sarah's handwriting, legal stamps, deadlines, boundaries, pieces of a life we built, pieces of a life Ethan tried to divide. I took one more drink of water, capped it, and got back in the truck. No dramatic exit, no cathartic tears, only miles ahead a place to sleep, work to do tomorrow, and a life that no longer spun around someone else's expectation. The road opened up, steady and plain. I drove,